All right. Like I said last time, I just gotta butter myself up a little bit. Take some deep breaths, try to relax a little bit, get in the zone. All right, how's everyone doing today? This is gonna be episode number 2 of Subeg's Garden. And as always, I am the host of the show. To start the show off, before I talk about my segments, I do have a little bit of warming up that I want to do, to get my vocal cords going, to get my thoughts all in order and all of that. Before I start, this actually is very pertinent because, is that even a word? Pertinent? I don't even know. This is important because I just came back from the gym. It's my day off today, so I just thought that, I might as well get this third take in. It's looking like 3 is a lucky number for me because the first 2 of this one were also no good. So here I am doing the third one. As I'm coming home from the gym, super sweaty, face dripping with sweat, arms, legs, all that. Worked out really hard. I get in my car and I get a phone call. And, I'm not going to shout out or whoever gave me this phone call because, to be honest, this phone call did nothing but piss me off because it just showed me, it just played to my biggest pet peeve. And I would say my biggest pet peeve is low-key when people flex for no reason, like no motive, nothing, like just flexing for the sake of flexing. I feel like flexing is so useless and pointless. In my opinion, people ain't happy with the shit they have, so they buy more material possessions thinking it's going to bring them more happiness. And these material possessions, all they do is throw it in your face, how much it costs, how much money they get, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. But in reality, the material possessions don't bring you nothing. Especially as you get more and more, I feel like it doesn't bring you no type of happiness. That's not my journey. And I feel like I even said this in the last episode is my journey is more about finding passion and immersion and joy and conversation. I'm looking for completely different things in life than I feel like my peers are. And I feel like they don't understand that, especially this motherfucker that called me, bro. Like, shit don't even make any sense. But moving on to the next part of this. My birthday was last week, so I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to myself. Turning 24, it's my Kobe year. I'm hoping to do special things because Kobe symbolizes and embodies the idea of greatness. I feel like we lost something when we lost Kobe. To be honest, that might be the nucleus of the whole pandemic and everything. Is losing Kobe. I definitely shed a couple thug tears when I seen Kobe gone. But that's actually for a different segment. I should write that down. A little bit more of this warming up segment. I have to preface by saying this. I didn't explain this well enough in the last episode, so I definitely got to do a better job of explaining this. I am an aspect of this show, but I'm just a part of the garden. I am not the garden. So I would love if you guys have questions for me and inquiries, comments, stories, anything like that. If you guys would like to share them with me, definitely don't hesitate. You guys can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, in the comment section, in the DMs. If you have my number, you can text me. The show is just as much about me as it is about you guys. And I would love to incorporate you guys more into it. Especially the people that are genuinely listening and interacting. Like, I for sure want to hear from you guys. But that being said, I did actually get a question. Oh my God, my stomach just growled. Fuck. I should have ate something. I did get a question. My first question of the show. Shout out to you, Alejandro. He texted me, what do I think of Adam 22 and his situation? The only thing I have to say about that is clout is one hell of a drug. This goes back to the whole material possession shit, you know? Like, we keep on wanting more and more, and it's not bringing us anything. We're actually losing ourselves in all the stuff that we get. We keep on needing more, you know? Sometimes good is good enough. But you can't explain that to people. Sometimes you tell people things and they just don't listen. And another thing before I start is that I did make a Patreon. I'm not going to plug this too hard because it's not the whole point of the show. But I did make a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Subegels. It's pretty much if you guys would like to support me on a deeper level. Don't think too much about it because most of my stuff, if not all of it, is going to end up being on YouTube and stuff. But on the Patreon, you do get access to RSS feeds, so you can download the show via MP3. You can put it onto your Apple Podcasts or any other podcasting service you guys use. I don't like to say this is a podcast. I would like to say this is my show because the word podcast low-key is played out. It's my show. Y'all can get my show on the Apple app. Hopefully I can bring it to Spotify sooner or later. The thought never evades me that I definitely have to earn your guys' time. And I would love to do that in a way where it shows that you guys know I'm passionate about the things that I talk about. But like I said, patreon.com, if you'd like to support me, you get access to the episodes early, you get the RSS feeds, you get Discord and all of that. Oh, and if you support me on there, I'll shout you out at the end of the video too. All right, let's actually get on with the first segment of the show. Last week, I had talked about video games last. This week, I would like to introduce a video game first. And the video game that I would like to talk about, as I alluded to last week, is Final Fantasy XVI. Or Final Fantasy XVI if you're into the Roman numerals. Which I actually have it written down on my notes in the Roman numerals. But in my opinion, Roman numerals low-key, they get pretty confusing. Because XVI is 16. And then I have right here XIV, that's 14. And that's like already confusing, you know? That's only one little shift. But so I wanted to talk about Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII. A little bit less about Final Fantasy VII for sure, because 16 is the one that's more current. But in a way, Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII, they kind of share a similar theme. Both of the games are pretty much about a corrupt body or corporation or government. And they're exposing and taking advantage of natural resources for power and control. In the world of Final Fantasy XVI, the natural resource that's being exposed is the mother crystals and the aether. In Final Fantasy VII, the natural resource that's being exposed is Mako. Yeah, it's actually crazy because the game, it takes place in Clive, who's our protagonist in the game, Clive Rossfield. It takes place in his teens, his 20s, and his 30s. And the game is about him like gaining power and being kind of more confident in himself in that role that he has to take on the burden of saving the world. And that's kind of the same thing with Cloud in Final Fantasy VII, who's the protagonist of that game. Cloud does the same thing. He's a soldier to a certain extent. He has to carry the burden of saving the world in that game. So I have a little bit of definitions I have written down here. In Final Fantasy XVI, like I said, it's the mother crystal. And according to the game's lore, the mother crystal is a mountain of sparkling crystals with the core in their depths, and that's where the aether concentrates. Mother crystals are the source of all crystals, and it channels the aether in the air to conjure magic. So in the world, if you can't conjure magic on your own, you have to use the mother crystal, or you have to have a crystal. The people in the world of Final Fantasy XVI that can conjure magic without the use of a crystal, they're called bearers, and they have a mark on their face. And that's where Clive comes in. Clive's a bearer. And in this world, the bearers are treated as slaves. So even though Clive is this like all-encompassing and powerful figure who can take people's icons from them, he's still treated as a slave. At least in his teens and his 20s, he was. But in all of that, I feel like Clive never loses his kindness. The way he speaks to people and the way that he interacts with them, he interacts with them just like a normal person. He doesn't act like he's a noble, or he doesn't act like he's all this, like a big shot. And he's also struggling with his own personal demons too. So in Final Fantasy XVI, the natural resource is the mother crystal. And that's also the thing that's taking away from the world. It's causing, the more the mother crystals are being used, the more it's sucking the life out of the planet. And it's making it like barren. And that's the same thing with Mako in Final Fantasy VII. So I have written here, Mako is the liquid form of the planet's life stream, which then gets condensed into materia. It appears as green. It appears as a green luminous substance. Essentially, they're pretty much the same thing, but I would say in 16, it kind of keeps more in line with the series tradition of being more about crystals and all that. But I guess you could say it's pretty much just the same thing. They're similar. And that's a way that Final Fantasy XVI kind of keeps the tradition of the series. It is more high fantasy or dark fantasy, you could say, as Final Fantasy VII is more like sci-fi. It's definitely more sci-fi. It's more like dystopian. If I were to compare Clive to the rest of the protagonists in the series, I would say, in my opinion, he's up there. I really enjoy his voice acting, and I really enjoy how he holds himself in the game. Compared to the other protagonists of the series, I've only played Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Final Fantasy XV. I know about some of the other ones, like Titus is from 10. I don't remember that fucking blonde dude from 12. And that one guy that carries the gun sword in 8. Forgetting all these people's names. But I did see them in Kingdom Hearts, so that's important to note. But he's up there. In my opinion, he's definitely better than Lightning. If you look at Lightning's character model, she is really striking, but I feel like in the games, she's very one note. Cloud, he's kind of this like edgy mercenary guy. I really like Cloud too, honestly. He's probably one of the most iconic Final Fantasy protagonists, for sure. And Noctis, you know, in the original vision of Final Fantasy 15, it was Final Fantasy Versus 13. And in that vision, I really liked what the character was going to be. But I feel like in the game when it came out, it kind of deviated from that. And he's kind of one note too. He kind of comes off as like a whiny little brat sometimes. But his story is also pretty sad if you get more into it. Now we're talking about the gameplay of Final Fantasy 16. The best way I could describe it is that it plays like a Devil May Cry game. And if you don't know what a Devil May Cry game is, the genre is pretty much like a character action game. That would be the genre of the game. So think of like a Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, God of War, the OG God of Wars. Because the new God of War is more like a Souls-like, I would say. Final Fantasy 16 is a character action game. In the story of the world, icons are pretty much like summons from the old Final Fantasy games. But in this game, they're powers that you can flip between. So in the beginning, you have the Phoenix Shift power, and that's like a dash, and it's like a fiery attack. And then the next one you get is, I believe, Wind, Garuda. The next one you get is Garuda, and that's like more wind abilities, and that's, instead of it being a dash, you can pull enemies close to you, and you could even use that to juggle enemies in the air. And with that, the combat is complicated enough for me to enjoy it, and I feel like it's really easy to pick up. But as you play more and more, you notice the depth, and that's something that I like about the game for sure. I'm playing the game in 30 FPS. There's 2 performance modes. There's a graphics mode and a performance mode. The performance mode is supposed to run at 60, but it dips way too much for my liking, and I definitely prefer a more constant frame rate than a variable one, especially if I'm console gaming. So I'm making the sacrifice of running the game in 30 FPS, which is unfortunate, but at least the game has pretty solid motion blur. And yeah, it's a good game. I'm only about maybe 50% through the game, probably around like 17 to 18 hours if I were to say. I just reached his 30s, so I haven't seen the story play out. But right now, it has a hold on me, I'm thinking a lot about it. So that must mean it's good in my eyes. But, is it better than Hi-Fi Rush, though? No, I'm just kidding. No, this game is good. That was my segment about Final Fantasy XVI and its comparisons to 7. The protagonists, they do have to... before I end this, another similarity between them is that the protagonists, they do kind of have to hurt society in the short term to get to a better future. And the world hates the protagonist for doing that. But some people do realize that we do have to hurt the world in the short term. We got to make sacrifices now for a better future. And that's also how it correlates to real life too. Let me take a swig of my coconut water. Moving on to the second segment of the show, I have a definition for you guys, or I would like to define a word for you guys. And that word is auteur. The word is spelled A-U-T-E-U-R. Dictionary.com has its definition as a filmmaker whose individual style and complete control over all elements of production give a film its personal and unique stamp. Shout out to dictionary.com. To me, what that means, what auteur means specifically, is a creator, not just a filmmaker. It's a creator that creates with zero compromises. The 2 people that I would like to talk about today, I feel they embody this idea of an auteur completely. The 2 people that I would like to talk about today is Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli and Christopher Nolan. Hayao Miyazaki and Christopher Nolan both create with zero compromises, and they love to reject industry trends. Nolan rejects industry trends by not using green screens, using practical effects, having ambitious set pieces, and filming in real-world locations. Miyazaki rejects industry trends by storyboarding first, taking a scriptless approach, and this allows for him to never really know where the story is going to end up going. Every keyframe and every frame of Studio Ghibli movies are hand-drawn. And in turns, that injects a lot of soul into the movie. And it injects a lot of humanity into Studio Ghibli movies. Both Miyazaki and Nolan have a strong aversion to CGI. But in my opinion, that's what makes them unique. And I feel like I can go on and on about both Miyazaki and Nolan. Miyazaki-san. I can probably go on and on about that. Maybe I'll leave that for a different segment, but I just wanted to define the word auteur for you and what it kind of means to me and what it means to this episode specifically. Both Miyazaki and Nolan released 2 movies Miyazaki released a movie called The Wind Rises, and Christopher Nolan released a movie recently called Oppenheimer. The Wind Rises came out in 2013. It's not his newest movie, but back then it was supposed to be his last. But with all creatives, you can't stop them from creating. So, of course, he's going to keep on creating. And he did release a new movie that came out this past month as well, but only in Japan, unfortunately for now. But that is supposed to be his last movie, so I am actually quite excited about it. But this goes into the third segment of the show. We're going to be talking about Oppenheimer and The Wind Rises. Keeping in line with the show and comparisons, I think that there is a lot of points of comparisons with both of these movies. Just to give a general overall comparison, both is about the creation of weapons, but the creator doesn't know or have any control how the weapon is going to be used. For The Wind Rises, that weapon is a plane, and planes inherently aren't destructive. Put into specific hands, then they become destructive. But in Oppenheimer's case, he created a bomb, and not only any bomb, but a nuclear bomb. And bombs inherently are destructive. But both of these movies have this encompassing theme of the dichotomy of creation and destruction. It's been almost 2 weeks since I've seen Oppenheimer. I kind of wish that I got on the mic earlier so I can have more thoughts about the movie. Number one I wanted to say is Oppenheimer is really long, but in my opinion, I feel like it utilizes that time because there is a lot of dialogue and a lot of ideas that Christopher Nolan had to explain to us. I will say one thing that confused me about the movie is, the modern day segments, or the segments that seem to be in the present were in like black and white, and then the segments in the past were in color. I don't know why he did that. I'm sure he has a reason, but to me it was kind of confusing. The sequencing in that aspect was kind of confusing to me. But yeah, Oppenheimer is pretty much about Robert J. Oppenheimer before, during, and after the creation of the nuclear bomb. And The Wind Rises is about Jiro Horikoshi, who's a Japanese man, and the creation of the Zero plane. The same thing with Oppenheimer. It takes you before, during, and a little bit after the creation of the Zero plane. So that's another way that they're similar. Both of these movies have a lot of the creator injected in them. I would say how Christopher Nolan approaches making movies is kind of the same way that Oppenheimer approached making the atomic bomb. That no compromise approach, that we're gonna do everything we can to get this right, trying to do things to perfection, and being fully consumed by what you do. And the same thing with The Wind Rises and Hayao Miyazaki. Sacrificing your friendships, sacrificing your relationships, sacrificing your family time. Jiro sacrificed, according to the details of the movie, Jiro sacrificed everything in order to make this plane because he's seen planes as beautiful dreams. In the beginning of the movie, you see him as a kid, and you see him dreaming about the idea of flight. But it wasn't as he got older, he realized that the idea of flight is tainted. In the movie, he does have an internal mentor, someone that's guiding him, but he only shows up in his dreams. His name is Caproni, and he was an Italian engineer, aeronautical engineer. And he only ever shows up in Jiro's dreams because they both share this same dream of flight. Caproni says, humanity dreams of flight, but the dream is cursed. Aircrafts are destined to become tools for slaughter and destruction. And it doesn't matter how much you love what you create. Sometimes it's not in your control. With both of the guys, with both Oppenheimer and Jiro, they're so focused on creating something that's perfect. They forgot that perfection is going to lead to a lot of destruction. And you could see the the burden and the toll that it takes on both of them. Because in reality, they both sacrificed everything for what they created. But at the same time, they're also sort of playing God. You know, in the movie, Oppenheimer, he doesn't have a say in where and when the US is going to use the bomb. His belief was that we should just show the world how powerful this weapon is. In US fashion, you know, you give a kid its toy, of course they want to play with it. It's the same thing with the government. Is you give them this toy of destruction that can obliterate cities. Of course they're gonna use it. And it just sucks that they used it on Japan, you know? And that's also one thing I wanted to say is I kind of understand why Christopher Nolan doesn't show that. Because one, I feel like dropping a bomb practically would be really hard to film, especially with how it happened. And two, is that the movie is not about the bomb, it's about Oppenheimer. Halfway through The Wind Rises, the movie becomes a love story. And that's also in a way where it's different from Oppenheimer. You know, he had love in his life, but he decided that, you know, it wasn't enough. So he went to look for more. But in the case for Jiro, he was so encapsulated and so devoted to his work. The company he worked for, which was Mitsubishi, they said, nah, fuck that. You need to take a break and you need to relax because you've been working too hard. And in that time, it helped him find someone that he loved. But with everything with both of these movies, that passion and that love, it's tainted. Especially in these movies. If you guys want kind of like a sequel to Oppenheimer, if you guys want to see the effects that the bomb had made on the Japanese people in a fictionalized way, I would recommend the movie The Grave of the Fireflies. It's also a Ghibli movie, but it's older. It came out in the 80s or 90s, I believe. So the animation is a little bit outdated, but you kind of get to see the toll that the bomb had on the Japanese people. But you also get to see, you know, the Japanese people have endured. They're always in threats for earthquakes and tsunamis and all these natural things that can happen to them. And it's just sad that we decided to bomb them. You know, it's sad we decided to bomb anyone, really, but it's like especially sad because they already had to deal with so much bullshit. And their infrastructure was behind back then. You know, they created their streets and their houses and stuff out of wood. So it's easy for them to catch on fire. But they've endured a lot. And I think that's something that you can take away from that. And this episode is profoundly Japanese as well because I talk about Final Fantasy XVI. I talk about Hayao Miyazaki, The Wind Rises. Those all come from them. To leave this segment with kind of like a question or maybe a statement, I would say, is it's impossible to separate the art from the artist when the artist puts their whole identity in their art. And yeah, that's all I have to talk about in this episode. You know, I talked about auteur, I talked about Final Fantasy, I talked about both Oppenheimer and The Wind Rises. I recommend both of the movies for sure. Christopher Nolan's a great director, so I even recommend all of his back catalog. Same thing with Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli. You know, there's much more that I could talk about because I have pages of notes about both of these movies and their relation to the creator. But I just want to really put an exclamation on this idea of creating with no compromises and how beautiful it is to put your all into your art. Because in a sense that it makes you vulnerable, but it also makes the art special. So yeah, that's the episode. I think that's good. I think I did a good job this time. It was a little heavy-handed, talking about some heavy subjects. As always, I appreciate you guys for listening. It means the world to me that you guys give me some of your time, and I'll never forget that. As always, check me out on YouTube, Patreon, all of that. Shout out to Selena for being my first patron. And yeah, Avatar out.